and welcome to the July and August edition of FAA Safety Briefing Live. We have a very informative and fun program for you this time. We're taking a theme from a classic movie as the storyline for many of the topics that will be discussed. I'm Paul Prydecker, and I'm joined by Susan Parson. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Doing well. It's always nice to work with you. I see that you might be in Arizona tonight.
I am. A storm just passed. It's monsoon season here.
Very good. Susan, if you would just tell our viewers about you and the work you do for the FAA.
I work for FAA Flight Standards. I do a lot of different things. I always say I'm the chief border collie for the Airman Certification Standards Project, but one of my fun jobs is also to be the editor-in-chief for the FAA Safety Briefing magazine and work with a really great team that you can read about on the broadcast page.
That's great. For myself, I've been flying for about 30 years. I just was kind of thinking about when I took my first lesson. So I'm 30 years this year. Like many people, started in general aviation. And about 19 years ago, I joined one of the airlines work because I can kind of bridge the gap between general aviation and Part 21. So welcome, everybody. And let's move on. And as we do with all of our Safety Briefing Live courses, you can get wings credit. If you go to the broadcast page, which is shown here, you'll see a link to click on that you can earn wings credit. And Susan, tell us how we can get more information from the print version.
Well, there's a link to the print copy also on the broadcast page. And toward the end of the show, we'll give you a few more options for how to find the magazine. So hopefully you will find it either in hard copy, which is available in various forms, or in one of our electronic versions, which is free.
Perfect. So before we get into the meat of this presentation, let's have a look at some of the topics that are generally covered in the issues. Susan, I know you're the editor of the magazine, but I also know you're a contributing writer. So tell us a little bit about the mission of FAA Safety Briefing and what some of the main topics are.
Well, so this is our mission statement, to be the safety policy voice for non-commercial general aviation. And we have 3 goals that we try to meet in all the articles. You see on this page what our regular departments are. And we have feature articles which are developed. We try to develop things thematically so that we're trying to cover something that you might be able to use as a reference later on. As one of my colleagues on the magazine says, we aim for shelf stability so that these are not immediately outdated. So I like the term. We use it a lot.
Very good. So let's have a look at the storyline of the main feature of this magazine, which is round up the usual suspects. And for our viewers, this is taken from a very classic movie called Casablanca. It's one of my all-time favorites, and it's one of the all-time great movies. It has everything you could ask for. It's got a love story, it's got a classic airplane, and some of the most memorable quotes that have survived the years and have become part of my culture. Susan, I happen to know a little bit about where you got this idea, but maybe you could tell our viewers about the fun challenge that is part of this program.
So actually, you're making me confess right here in front of everybody. I stole it from you.
Yes.
I did, because, the way that I'd heard Paul talk about it, and I'll let him tell that story about how he came up with it. But we were looking at a way to cover a number of kind of diverse topics. And a couple of them I thought, oh, we've done that before, we've done that before. And suddenly it came into my head, oh, I could use Paul's idea and we could call it Round Up the Usual Suspects and have a Casablanca theme for the issue. But it would be a way to tie everything together, and that's what we aim to do. So you can tell how you came up with it.
The way it all started for me was several years ago. I was conducting a instructor meeting at our airline, where we get the line check airmen and the simulator instructors together. And one of the questions I asked the group was, what are you seeing out there? What are some of the topics that, you're dealing with as an instructor and an examiner? And one of our long-term instructors stood up and said, well, it's the usual suspects, stalls, single engine work, non-precision approaches. And at the end of the meeting, I thought, if the usual suspects continue to be the usual suspects, then maybe we have a training issue that needs to be addressed, because our goal should be to eliminate the usual suspects and work on those as training topics. So I kind of took that on at my organization to try to address the usual suspects. And then I know in my conversations with you kind of use that as a springboard to come up with this issue.
And for the same reasons, what we're trying to do is find ways to address things that seem to be persistent problems so that maybe we can eliminate them as persistent problems, find new suspects.
Perfect. Well, we'll get into this a little bit later, but for right now, I'd like to introduce our special guest. As we do on previous versions of FAA Safety Briefing Live, we have a guest, and I'd like to welcome Corey Stevens of the FAA. Corey is a research analyst at the FAA Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention. Corey, it's nice to see you, and I appreciate you joining us this evening.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move on with the program?
Sure. Yes, I'm like you said, I'm an operations research analyst with the Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention here in Washington, D.C. Been with the FAA a little Engineering Accident Investigation section of the Airline Pilots Association prior to that, and then I was also a flight data analyst at United Airlines prior to that. So
that's great. So Corey, we're gonna come back to you a little bit later in the program. Welcome and stand by, and we'll get back to you a little bit more in the program.
Oh, thank you.
You bet. So, Susan, getting on with some of the normal columns, Jump Seat is one that's written by John Duncan, of the manager of flight standards. Kind of to tee this up, I know that the compliance philosophy started, I believe, in 2015. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I think it was somewhere during that time, I made a presentation to an operators conference, and the title of the presentation was called "Never Waste a Mistake." And what I meant by that was, as pilots, we live in a world where we're continually having to mitigate risk and manage things, and mistakes will happen. I was making the point in my presentation that in order for lessons to be learned, they need to be shared, and that it's always a good idea to discuss, mistakes as almost as a gift of learning. So I read with interest the Jump Seat article concerning compliance philosophy and what its meaning is. So pick it up from there if you would.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons that we think some of the usual suspects are still around is that we've over the years, and not just in aviation, people have learned to hide mistakes. They don't want to confess. And I love the phrase, never waste a good mistake, because I think it really goes to what we're trying to do with compliance philosophy, which is find and fix problems before they can cause an accident or incident. And the FAA is looking to find ways to assure that there's a free flow of information. And I think Corey will talk about later on that free flow of information is absolutely crucial to making sure that we find issues that otherwise would be hidden until somebody gets caught by them. So we're dealing with things in a different way. And my boss always likes to make the point, this is not about kinder and gentler. This is about more effective. For people who are reckless or unwilling or unable to follow the rules and do what they're supposed to do, yes, there will be enforcement action. But for people who make honest mistakes and want to cooperate and help make those mistakes useful for other people and for general aviation safety, that's a different matter.
And what I've noticed as well, I think it's probably human nature, and especially so with pilots, is that pilots seem to always have the idea that it won't happen to me, that it's always going to happen to somebody else. And when we do read about some event, I notice that pilots are very quick to say, "Oh, well, I would never have done that." And there's a quick move to vilify the pilot or pilots involved in an event. And instead of doing that, we should ask ourselves, what can I learn from this so that I don't do it myself?
Exactly.
And that seems to be, a key element of the compliance philosophy is education and training.
That's exactly it.
So I know, let's move on and have a look at some of the data. I know that compliance philosophy has been around since 2015. How's it working? And the table that's in the article references I guess it's the top 5 regulations that most often are associated with compliance actions. So
we're not going to quiz you on the specific actions, but I think this is one of those places where we really want to encourage you to pick up the magazine and to read about these are the areas where we're seeing issues, and these are the areas that we want people to try to avoid. I wanted also to focus on the fact that we've seen a 75% drop in enforcement actions, but the number of compliance actions, which is different, is up. And of those who, I thought this was an interesting point too, of those who have been dealt with through compliance actions, only 1% have done it again. So, I mean, we're believing this information sharing, teaching, training, education focus for those who are willing and able to comply. We're getting positive results from it, and that's a good thing.
It just occurred to me that perhaps the compliance philosophy is a mechanism to deal with the usual suspects.
It is.
Very good.
Among other things.
Yes. On our next visual is the key topic of this presentation, round up the usual suspects, which is a famous quote throughout the movie Casablanca. Susan, you've summarized for us several of them, and can you go through some of those for our viewers, and also talk a little bit about the fun challenge that you have embedded in the magazine?
Yeah, we used there are a lot of different data sources, and we'll talk about some of the FAA ones later. But one of the data sources that most people are familiar with is the AOPR Safety Institute has a null report that they do every year. And the data, it's the most recent one goes back to 2014, but it's still it's a very good way to look at what are the incidents and accidents out there. And we picked out several things. We found, as we're going to talk about later, loss of control, that's obviously a big one. Instructional accidents, that always surprises me. But then again, it doesn't, because when you really think about it, instructors are pretty busy. VFR into IMC, that is definitely a persistent usual suspect. And then the other one that we really keep seeing over and over again is runway incursions of one sort or another. So those are the topics that we decided to address in this particular issue as our usual suspects that we want to eliminate. And we really tried in pretty much every article, there is something that is inspired by, or it's either a direct quote or a phrase that is inspired by Casablanca. So we'd like to encourage you, just for fun, to try to keep track of what you recognize from the film. Go watch the movie if you haven't seen it, because it's a great movie. And I think we'll try to recognize the person who comes up with the most in a future issue of the magazine.
It should be fun. I've looked through it. As I said, I'm a big fan of the movie. I've seen it a number of times, and if I read the magazine as many times as I've seen the movie, I think I could pick out most of them. So,
yeah, well, I put a lot of them in there, so I'm going to have to figure it out myself how many there are.
Very good. So one of the quotes in the movie through one of the scenes is on our next visual about Master of My Fate, and it references a scene reasonably early on in the movie. When I read that, I thought, Master of My Fate is another way of saying pilot in command. As PICs of aircraft, we are masters of our fate, and it really describes the responsibility that we all have as pilot in command of an aircraft. I did see that this is largely devoted to loss of control, and then there's also some information on slow flight and stalls, its role and treatment in the new ACS. So walk us through a little bit of this, Susan, and then I'll have a couple of comments just to kind of summarize it for us.
Sure. Well, loss of control in flight or loss of control during maneuvering is just one of the persistent causes, and as you see here, performing maneuvers that should be within our capabilities often causes us to be no longer a master of my fate. So this kind of led to one of the issues that I wanted to address in this article. The FAA's Airplane Flying Handbook, the most recent version, has a whole chapter. It used to be called the Stall Spin chapter, and it's been renamed because the most important thing is maintaining aircraft control. So that's what it's about now. And that's why that's the subtitle of the article. But there's been a lot of discussion about what I learned as minimum controllable airspeed. I think we're trying to find a different term for it. But the FAA did not take that training or testing element out. It's still part of the full stall task, both power on and power off stalls, because you can't get to a full stall without going through that flight condition. What we did do was to reframe what we now call the slow flight task to be slow flight as you would perform it in normal flight operations. And what it really comes down to is that, I think, as I've gotten the last bullet here, we weren't making headway against loss of control by testing pilots in a way that encouraged them to disregard the stall horn. And I personally have seen pilots who seem to ignore it because, hey, it sounds normal. I know how to do that. So what we're trying to do is look at rounding up this particular usual suspect in a more effective way, while still encouraging people to train in all regimes of flight. And obviously, like I said, this particular element is still in the full stall tasks. It's including with an acknowledgement. So that's really the gist of this article.
Well, and my own experience, and I'm sure it's similar to many people who learn to fly in GA aircraft. A typical stall lesson was, let's go up, do some stalls, let's see how easy these are, don't be afraid. When in fact, I think stalls are something that we should never really be comfortable with. Yes, we need to know about recognition and recovery, but even in the 121 environment, there's been an entire rework of how stalls are introduced and trained, both from an academic standpoint as well as a practical standpoint. And in March of 2019, there's a new rule covering how Part 121 carriers introduce this. It's part of extended envelope training, but we have to come up with a program on how we will teach slow flight at both high altitude as well as low altitude. So it's encompassing all phases of aviation, and I believe we'll make some progress. I mean, we've made quite a lot of progress in how we've been sort of undoing the way we used to teach things and kind of looking at it under a new way. In summary, I mean, what we're really talking about is flight path management. Mm-hmm. And flight path management, whether it's under manual control or automated, both, have a role in slow flight and also stall awareness.
Right, and in being master of your fate. And one of your comments made me think of a phrase that has certainly crossed my mind a lot in talking about this topic. When we do the same thing and get the same result and keep doing it, then that's one of the definitions of insanity, doing the same thing expecting a different result. We need to try something different. So I think, as you said, we're doing that across the community. Yeah,
for sure. The next topic is about wrong surface operations, runway incursions, runway excursions, taxiway mistakes, things like that. The most important point that I saw in this is that many of these occur with good visibility and in daylight conditions. So what's going on, Susan?
Well, this article talks about environmental and human factors. It goes into more detail than we can cover here, so we'd certainly encourage you to read the article. But, the environmental factors include things like, there's some pretty complicated runways out there, and there are various mitigations for that. But there are also the good old human factors that trip us up every time. Distraction, fatigue, expectation bias. I have found myself plagued by all of those. One of the stories I can tell on myself one time is expectation bias. I was expecting to be told cleared to land on runway 1. I was cleared to land on runway 10. In my head, I heard it as 01 rather than 10. So fortunately, it was one of those. It didn't cause a problem, but it could have. And so I think all of us have been prone to the sorts of things that happen here. And we talk about mitigation study. Most of the things that you've heard here before. And I have a small confession to make. One of the reasons that we ended up with this particular issue of the magazine, this topic of putting things together, is that we're constantly encouraged to address things like runway safety. And my first reaction was, oh goodness, we've done that before. Do we really have to go through the same things again? But if the same things are happening, certainly we need to keep addressing it. And so that's what we're trying to do with this piece.
Sure. One of the recommendations I have for general aviation pilots is something borrowed from my 121 world, and that is, even if you're going to an airport on a visual approach on a bright, clear, beautiful day, if you've not been there before, it's not a bad idea just to back it up with an approach aid like an ILS. We fly visual approaches 90% of the time, but we always have an ILS frequency in there if it's available to back it up so that it's
right.
A little bit obvious for us. You can do the same thing in general aviation. And another tip might be, if you have a mnemonic or a checklist or however you manage your pre-takeoff flight, is to put, runway heading, is one of the items on the checklist to make sure that the runway heading corresponds to something that, is making sense based on your environment. So it's an important topic, and you're right, whether they're small airports or large airports, sometimes there's just confusion that needs to be managed.
Absolutely. And we can help ourselves too by not multitasking or trying to. One of my rules for people I fly with is all eyes outside when the airplane is moving. Nobody's programming, nobody is taking notes, nobody is doing anything except looking outside.
Well, in fact, many, many years ago at our airline, we actually eliminated a taxi checklist. That used to be our normal checklist, was a taxi checklist, which was done with at least one person with their head down. And we eliminated it altogether and took items from the taxi checklist and either moved it to, kind of an after start or before takeoff, with the idea being when you're in a busy environment, you want your head on a swivel, looking
Yep.
around, looking for things. So
absolutely.
Okay. The next topic here it's entitled, maybe not today, but it's central to one of the issues about loss of control, but it's VFR into IMC. So there's some information coming from the Null report, and you've got some data that shows the risk of fatalities in this is quite high.
Absolutely. And I want to point out too, this article was, the author of this particular piece is Sabrina Woods. You may remember her from the last broadcast, and it's written in her usual creative style. She's certainly done her part with the Casablanca theme, as you'll see in the article. But she also proposes in here, and we really encourage you to read this, that she has a different take on some of the reasons that people go do VFR into IMC. And they may be some of the same concepts, but she's named them a little differently. Just around the river bend, where did everybody go? And the no place like home, of course, is you're getting home, get there-itis that
Sure.
I think we've all been prey to from time to time. So I'll wrap this one up by saying, as she points out here, the best preventive measure is have a plan B, but also D, E, F, and G for anything that you're going to do, and make sure that you're prepared to execute those. If you have an accident on a good day, or on a bad day, chances are good the investigation will happen on a really nice one, because weather does pass.
Indeed. And I think that the role of technology in this is also something that needs to be considered. The more we're able to put in our cockpit, the more we might be over-reliant on it, and possibly maybe overconfident that we can we can manage this. But as Sabrina pointed out last time, the tools are there to kind of give you an overall picture. They're not necessarily a tactical measure.
Exactly.
Fuel and managing fuel is the topic of our next one, titled Not an Easy Day to Forget. This is really about developing a set of procedures for managing fuel. There's some great ideas in here, and Susan, elaborate on some of those if you would, please.
Well, they talk about how easy it is to do. It's very easy for all of us to sit home and read about it and say, oh, I would never do that. And we mentioned that earlier. Well, this is one that particularly speaks to me because years ago, I had just finished my CFI instrument instructor check ride, and I was so excited and so eager to get home, and I jumped in the airplane and I flew away, and I started thinking, gee, how much fuel do I have? And then I started doing mental math and realized that probably I was going to be pushing it. So I started thinking probably I'll get home. And then I remembered a friend who always says, if you have to use the word probably in association with any of your flight planning, you should definitely think again. So definitely go back and start over. So I realized that it would be a really ugly thing if I had an accident, a fuel starvation accident, right after I had this triumph of getting my instrument instructor certificate. So I diverted, I got fuel, and I felt a whole lot better. But this talks, and by the way, I'm glad that I did. I probably would have made it home, but I shouldn't ever have to wonder that. But it was a lesson for me in how easy it is to talk yourself into doing things like that. So the disciplines that are discussed in this article: calculate your time under different conditions, percentage-based, that was a new one for me. So you can read about that in this article. A timer, we all still have one. Hopefully we all still use them. And then this is the technology piece. A lot of airplanes now have fuel totalizers, and if you're looking to upgrade and you have some money to put into it, that could be a worthwhile investment.
Well, and I also believe that we shouldn't leave some of the old school methods and technologies behind. I mean, the idea of just writing down on a chart or a log or something your fuel use at a certain point in time and space is still not a bad idea. Yes, we have all the information that we can get in through automation and some of the great tools on board, but it's only as good as the information we put in. So if we did not load the fuel on board correctly, then the rest of the information won't make any sense. So sometimes just kind of reverting back to how, we used to do things might be a good idea.
Exactly.
The next topic refers back to the reference that we started out with earlier about instruction and risk mitigation through instruction. And it comes from a line in the movie where Ilsa says that you have to think for both of us. So talk to us about that, and especially about the ACS.
Sure. Well, this one is, again, instructional accidents. At first, it might be surprising that that's one of the big usual suspects. But then if you've been an instructor, you realize, well, it is a busy time. You are truly multitasking because your attention has to be in thinking for two. You should obviously be moving the student toward, or your person, the customer, toward thinking for themselves. But when you start off, a new primary student, a new instrument student, you really are doing the thinking for everybody and the managing the flight, conducting the flight. So this gets to where the instructor ACS, which is under, it's in development now and starting to get closer to being released for comment. It really talks about not just teaching risk management, but managing risk while you're a flight instructor. So how you do the thinking for two to be effective and safe for everybody that's in the airplane. So this article talks a little bit more in detail about some of the things that are coming in the instructor ACS.
Well, and risk management is a skill that can be taught, just like heading airspeed altitude management.
Exactly.
The post-flight section on the next visual is a little bit more about risk and how we deal with it. More comments about the ACS and how important it is to remember our role as PIC and how important this topic of risk management is. Everybody wants to do the right thing, but sometimes, it requires some extra effort.
Exactly. Yeah, this is this column, we moved it here because it fits in with the instructional risk and a little bit of discussion about the ACS and the risk management, inclusion, integration with everything. We all want to see ourselves, who we are really. We're pilots. We want to be good pilots. We try to be good pilots, but how do we do that? And we really do have to do better, all of us, in trying to help get around some of the things that continue to cause problems. And when we think that it couldn't possibly happen to me, well, for just about every one of the issues here, I can think of somewhere where if only I could have, a slight change one way or another could have made a big difference. And there are things that I didn't even know what I didn't know.
Exactly. So that's a good summary of many of the topics in this issue. I'd like to move now to our guest and bring back Corey Stevens. So, Corey, one of the things I saw in your article was about the role of a SIAS, which is a program to gather data, safety data. And you made mention of the fact that general aviation has a role in a SIAS, and I'm just curious, what sort of data can we get from a general aviation operation that would feed into this program? And tell us a little bit about a SIAS to get us started.
Sure. No, happy to. And thanks again, Paul and Susan, for having me this evening. There's actually quite a bit of data that we can bring from general aviation. I think we first really learned the value of flight data, or data in general, in GA. There's an accident that occurred back in 2007 at the University of North Dakota. It was a student and instructor and I cross country night in October on Piper Seminole. Aircraft never returned. Next morning, began a search operation. They found the tail of the airplane sticking out of a bog in Minnesota. Pulled the aircraft out of the bog, did a control check. Everything looked good. It looked like a spatial disorientation accident. Dark moonless night. No apparent problems with the aircraft. The aircraft, though, was equipped with an Avidyne flight deck, and the NTSB pulled the avionics, sent it to Washington, D.C., and had them read. When they took a look at the data, it had gone from straight and level flight to heading towards the ground in about the accident. Went back and re-examined the wreckage. One of the UND party members had noted some dents along the at the top of the wing and on the empennage. And on further look, there was seemed to be some biomaterial in there. So the NTSB IIC had that sampled, had it sent out for some DNA analysis, and it turned out to be goose DNA. So what probably back prior to good data would have gone down as a spatial disorientation accident was found to be a wildlife strike. So it really opened, I think, a lot of people's eyes as to what you could do with flight data and the importance of flight data. And at that time, like I said, around 2007, 2008, UND began looking at doing just kind of flight data monitoring, which is FOQA without like a full blown FOQA program. So they began doing some FDM work, and then they, in conjunction with Embry-Riddle, began a formal research project as part of at that time, CIGAR, one of the GA Centers of Excellence. And over time, avionics evolved. You went from Avidyne to some Garmin G1000 equipped aircraft that Pulling data off those was as simple as removing an SD card from the bezel. I think off the top of my head, I think it's around 62 parameters were the kind of the base for the beginning. That was the amount of data you could pull off, everything from airspeed to vertical speed to G's to pitch and roll. It was just very good data. And I think we're about 12 to 14 universities that contribute in some way, and we've got around 840 to 850,000 hours of GA flight training data in ASIAS. ASIAS is a means to bring different data sources together, look at it as a community, as a kind of aggregated, to look for risks and then find ways to mitigate those risks before they become a fatal accident. We can also use. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please.
No, say we can also use that data to help us determine some of the mitigations that we've put in place in the past. Are they having the effect we want? So if we've done studies, Aviation Joint Steering Committee on loss of control, system component failure power plants, so anything engine related. We currently have a study ongoing on controlled flight into terrain. Those fixes, those mitigations that we've put in place for those accidents, we can use this data to help us determine if we're having the desired effect. And this is everything from flight data to pilot reports to data from manufacturers. We, the FAA, bring in about 180 different data sources. So that's radar data, outage data, ATC data, all those different pieces of information coming together to give us a kind of a complete picture of what's going on in the NAS. So the data doesn't come to us; it goes to a kind of a central location, third party. It's not that we're using that data to kind of go through and look for things. It's us as a community looking at that data.
So it sounds like out of an unfortunate event, some good things have come from that. So thanks for summarizing that for us, Corey. Susan, two more columns about checklist is one of the columns, and then vertically speaking. So would you like to pick up from there, please?
Sure. Checklist was with some of the work that Corey has just talked about and some of the information that they provided. I mean, this goes into, it's not just about finding getting the information, but now what can we do with it to educate, inform, and try to make a difference, try to move the needles, as they say. So one of the things that comes out of it is a product that's highlighted here in Checklist, the GA Safety Enhancement Topic Sheets. And those are accessible on the same page on the FAA website where you can find FAA Safety Briefing, the magazine. But these topic sheets are developed in coordination with the GA Joint Steering Committee, which is Corey has talked about here. And they are intended to be bite-sized pieces that summarize the problem and things that you can do to resolve it. So, Corey, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you go about developing, how does the group come to the conclusion to develop these things?
Sure. Yeah, the work of the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, like the commercial aviation safety team that kind of came before it, it's purely data-driven. So the first thing we have to do as a community is take a look at 10, 15, 20 years of fatal general aviation accidents and categorize those. So there's a taxonomy that was developed when CAS first began its work, so that when I call loss control versus what you call loss control versus what someone else calls loss control, we're talking the same events. Once we categorize those events, we can take a look at where we see the largest risks set, where we see the largest amount of fatal accidents. From there, we get subject matter experts together. We conduct a kind of a root cause analysis of those accidents, find the risks that are leading to those, develop mitigations. And the important thing for this group is we throw everything against the wall, so nothing's off limits. There's a scoring process that it helps us determine which of those mitigations will be the most effective. We do a cost-benefit analysis to kind of give us an idea where the best bang for the buck is. And then those get voted on by the GAGSC, which is made up of the community. So the pilot organizations, manufacturers, the instructor community, academia, different lines of business within the FAA, all those in the insurance industry, all those folks that have that can kind of bring resources and knowledge to the table, help us develop these. There's not a single silver bullet. Everything's not fixed with technology or training or best practices or procedures. It's a mixture of all those different things. So these kind of like you were mentioning, that kind of this bite-sized information bulletins that you can get on those safety enhancements cover all those different things. So it could be anything from affordable angle of attack indicators to aeronautical decision making, pilot medication. There was actually a lot of us when we began our work were surprised. Just a very small story. One of the things that came up was use of medication like that contain diphenhydramine, so things like Benadryl. We had a doc from CAMI who was on the group with us who asked us, "Hey, how long after you take something with diphenhydramine should you fly?" A good chunk of us, aviation safety professionals in the room, pilots, we all took the max dosage, which was it's every 4 to 8 hours. So we took 8 hours times 2, 16 hours. That was our answer. Doc said, no, 5 times that, so 40 hours.
Yeah,
so
Corey, that was one of the issues that we talked about in, I think, our last issue of safety.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. It's all, it goes to the fact that this is all of a piece. Yeah. And the way that these things are done, to me, it's sort of like making spirits. You start with a lot and you end up with a small, potent piece. So we've done that here. And if we move on to the next one, we're talking about vertically speaking, where you've got the helicopter safety team, which is you've been contributing to some of the work that they've done as well. So I know you mentioned before you're not a helicopter guy, but you might just highlight a couple of the things on this one, and then we'll move on.
Sure. Yeah. So the process that we developed through the commercial aviation safety team, we've utilized it with general aviation. We brought it to the helicopter community, much like GA and the commercial team. It's the full community, manufacturers, pilots, everyone working together. And as you can see at the Pareto on the bottom left there, same thing. Start with the largest killers, work your way down. Their mitigations have been everything from management, training for pilots and crews, enhanced helicopter vision system, spatial. Those are factors that we saw in those top killers. We're also expanding the work, and we're doing some work with the UAS community now. So they've actually begun. They haven't had any fatalities yet, but they're working on discovering what risks they have that could lead to a fatality and trying to mitigate those early. So
you're rounding up the usual suspects there even earlier.
We're trying to.
All right.
Corey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Program. It's very informative, and thanks so much for what you're doing for safety.
No, thank you again.
Our pleasure. And Susan, we have another take from the movie. Common quote from Rick Blaine was, "Here's looking at you, kid." There's 3 National GA Award honorees that we'll just briefly introduce. Daniel Chrisman is the 2018 Flight Instructor of the Year, and he's very active in the EAE Young Eagles program.
Yeah, this is it was really fun to read about these people, and for those who are going to be at Oshkosh, you'll have a chance to meet them in person because, of course, they'll be there to receive the awards. Here's Looking at You Kids seemed to be the perfect title to use to introduce these. I remember one of the things in the article about Daniel is that he considers an empty seat to be a wasted opportunity to share aviation. So, and then moving on to the next one, we have William Pancake, and I think, Paul, you particularly noticed that this is one of the few people who has received both the Charles Taylor Master Mechanic Award and the Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award. So there are not very many people who can achieve one of those, much less both.
No, that's right. He's certainly a talented individual, and he deserves the award.
Yeah, he specializes in some of you notice here Aranca aircraft, and I thought that was pretty cool too.
Absolutely.
So then leading to the next one, our FAA Safety Team Representative of the Year. What her specialty is, Catherine Cavagnaro, her specialty really goes to one of the topics here, avoiding loss of control, because she's made a name for herself in spin training, recovery, and avoidance. I was also struck by the fact that she is, I guess her day job, she's a professor of mathematics. So these are always, it's always great to get to meet the General Aviation Award winners, because they're such multi-talented people.
Indeed. Yeah. So congratulations to the three of them, and they do great work for the industry for us.
Absolutely.
So our next kind of recurring topic is concerning maintenance procedures and mechanics. This specific one is about torque. I could sort of lead this off with just a quick story. I used to have a project to be building an airplane, and I learned very quickly about the recommendations from the manufacturers about certain fasteners have to be torqued properly. But my real life experience with torque had something to do with my motorcycle. I had a very slight leak of my water pump, which was going to be handled under warranty with no trouble. But while I was underneath the motorcycle, just sort of gazing at things, I looked up at the oil pan, and I thought that one of the screws didn't seem quite tight enough just by visual inspection. I didn't have any data other than just my eye.
Uh-oh.
So what does anybody with a wrench in his hand do except, I must know better. I'll go ahead and tighten this just a little bit. And in a heartbeat, I twisted the head right off. So now on top of the water leak, now I had an oil leak. And because my motorcycle is from a country in Europe with a 3-letter manufacturer name, everything is expensive, especially the mistakes that we make ourselves. So I got the repair, and I got it fixed, and I got a lecture from the mechanic saying, don't do that again, that these things are torqued for a reason, and you should pay attention to them.
Well, and that's one of the things that this article goes to, that it really is important to pay attention to what the manufacturer's recommendations are, even more so in an airplane, because we all know that you can't just pull over or as easily as you can in a car. And so I thought the title here, A Most Vulnerable Spot, some of you will recognize that as another of our movie references. It was appropriate for this one. So you can read all about it.
Yeah, it's a good article, and also a good reminder about, do the right thing when you're working with fasteners, and whether you're on repair or a building mission, it helps to follow the manufacturer's guidelines.
Absolutely.
Our next two aeromedical topics are covered in aeromedical advisory and condition inspection. And the first one, Susan, deals with opioids. And the article by the federal air surgeon, Dr. Mike Berry, discusses that in some detail.
Yeah, it does. I mean, this goes to something Corey was talking about before, that a lot of people don't know what the required wait time is for anything. And we did talk about Benadryl. I think one of the previous columns discussed that more in detail. But look at this, the required wait time for most pain medication is at least 3 days. So we're not talking about hours, we're talking about days. One of the issues that really is addressed here is that opioids, people who get addicted to opioids may start out as legitimate users of pain medication, and you just don't know how easily you can get addicted. So this is just one of those awareness things, and make sure you talk to your AME. And just as always, we always have to be ultimately responsible for doing the right thing with our health.
Yeah, it's a great article with some great advice. And the next medical related article is condition inspection. The phrase, a gun pointed right at your heart, about coronary heart disease. Another
line from the movie.
We're giving away too many of the secrets.
Oh, no. There are lots more in there, I promise. These are just some of the obvious ones. But yeah, I mean, coronary heart disease, and the point that's being made here, one of them is that sometimes the symptoms, this is the difference between operating on the ground and operating in the air, that between not just altitude, but some of the situations that might come about when you're flying could trigger symptoms that could be very dangerous. So I think when we talked about a most vulnerable spot in maintenance, there is a most vulnerable spot for people here as well. So absolutely.
And again, some good information about people who may have had this condition, what their options are, and absolutely, you know, the importance of looking into it. So the next topic is ATIS, and this is the FAA Safety Briefing, I would say, roundup of topics and roundup of news over the past few months. Some of them are spelled out here, but this is a nice summary for the readers to see what's been going on in the industry.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out too, going back to some of the stuff that Corey had worked on, this issue, the ATIS column, talks about 2 of the safety enhancement topics. July, fly the airplane first. We've all heard that. And then the August version is going to be maneuvering flight, safety while turning, climbing, descending close to the ground, because we all know loss of control in maneuvering flight has still been one of our issues. So sure, those are the safety enhancement topics for the summer. So keep a lookout for those.
That's great. We'll begin wrapping up this edition of Safety Briefing Live, and I know that you're always interested in feedback.
We are.
How can people give feedback, and how do you respond to it?
So you see the email address on the bottom. There's also a QR code that will take you right to our mailbox. We do check that mailbox, and unless somebody asks us not to for some reason, we do answer everybody, but unless somebody doesn't want to be published, we show you how we respond to the feedback right here in Flight Forum.
Do you have a sense of how many people are asking feedback and giving comments on a regular basis?
It varies. It depends on, I couldn't give you a number right off the top of my head, but it does vary according to topics. Some topics and some issues seem to generate more interest than others. So, and sometimes I'm always surprised by what gets attention, but we obviously try to take everything seriously.
Well, I suspect that this edition will get some feedback for you.
I hope so.
Yeah. So there's a number of places to find FAA Safety Briefing. There's obviously the web address, and what are some of the other ones, Susan?
So the web, obviously you can subscribe if you want to, print edition, those are at the bottom as you see there. We have various electronic formats. You can get email notifications, and you can also follow us on social media. We contribute pretty substantially to the FAA's Facebook posts, and we have our own Twitter stream at FAA Safety Brief, and that is monitored pretty carefully as well. So there are lots of ways to talk to us and to reach us. And as we move to the next slide, you'll see one of the reasons at the bottom of this one is was a pointer to archived editions. And I do want to point out, if you go there, you can download for free in whatever electronic format you want some of our past issues, which again, we aim for things that will be references and that will live for a while in basic med, compliance philosophy. These are topics that if you're looking for a single reference for specific topics and what the FAA's views are, that's what you'll find here. So we hope that you'll take advantage of that.
They're great magazines, and all of you involved in it should really be congratulated and have a word of thanks for putting together such a nice program.
We have a great staff, and if you want to meet them, the broadcast page has a link to the FAA safety team staff. And one of these days, I'm going to persuade one of them to join us on this program as the guest. They've all been a little shy so far. Great.
And I know that the FAA, yourself included, will have a presence at Oshkosh.
Indeed. This issue of the magazine includes the Safety Center Forum schedule, including some of the presentations that you and I will do jointly and together. Corey, are you presenting this year as well?
I'm not sure if we're presenting, but we will be in the, we'll have a General Aviation Joint Steering Committee booth and accident investigation prevention booth right behind the Safety Center area.
So those of you, thank you. So those of you who are going to be in Oshkosh, look for us there. We'll be interested and eager to meet you. There's the schedule, but if it changes any, there'll be a big poster board outside the Safety Center. And
it's air conditioned.
And it is air conditioned. That matters. Which
often is a good thing. So Susan, I know that you've got the next issue up in September, October of this year, and I see a kaleidoscope.
You do.
I do.
Yes, the kaleidoscope theory, what we're doing with September, October is we wanted to talk about the role that various parts of the aviation community play. And these would be big organizations, small organizations, type clubs. Obviously, the FAA Safety Team is one. But the way that we decided to frame it was in terms of a kaleidoscope, because it's actually one of my favorite things. You can pick it up and give it a twist, and the same pieces can come up with a very different picture. And the thinking for organizing the issues this way is that you can, as you progress through your aviation ambitions and experience and interest, you give it a different twist and you can create the community that works for you and supports you in what you're trying to do in different ways. So that's the organizing theme, and I can't wait to see what we figure out for the cover.
I'm sure it's all a challenge to find the content, but I'll look forward to that one as well. And we'll make a presentation sometime in September, I believe. So we'd like to remind our viewers about the Wings credit that's available for this presentation. And the broadcast page has a link for Wings credit. And then the print copy is also available through the broadcast page. So I encourage everybody to do their Wings work, have a look at the print copy to find some of the quotes and answers. And that'll be a wrap up for us. So Susan, it's always good to work with you, and our special thanks to Corey for his appearance and for his work.
And I'd also like to say thanks to the magazine staff for all that they contribute, and to John Typen, who is the man behind the curtain and making all the magic work for the rest of us. So it's great to work with you all. And Corey, thanks for letting me twist your arm. Very glad to have you.
Well, and my thanks to John as well. He makes this easy for us. So
you all in
thanks,
September.
everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you in September, and please come by the FAA booth or the FAA building at Oshkosh and look at some of the presentations there. Take care.